There are moments in everyone's life when their soul feels trapped, not by physical chains, but by something far more elusive and powerful, an emotional connection that still pulls them towards someone who is no longer present, or who is present only physically, but not emotionally. This feeling of attachment stings like an unhealed wound that never stops bleeding. When the mind already recognizes the need to let go, but the heart is still unable to do so, there is a sense of losing in an invisible inner struggle that no one asked to begin, instead of banal consolations like, "It will all pass," or "You'll get through it." Deep, transformative, and most importantly, real knowledge is offered, because there is an understanding of what you are feeling and an awareness that this attachment which is stealing your world is not just nostalgia or dependence, but an inner call to heal something much deeper. You are invited to walk the path to this healing together, relying on the wisdom of one of the most outstanding minds in psychology, Carl Jung. Perhaps you have ever felt that the pain is not caused by the person themselves, but by what they represented in your life, an unfulfilled dream, that version of yourself that you only lived next to him or her. If so, this information is for you, as it is not just about how to survive a breakup. It is planned to delve into the process of conscious, mature, and authentic emotional detachment. But how do you do it right? Stay with us, and you will learn how to break free from the shackles of the past and start a new chapter in your life. A deep inner transformation is coming, which will affect not only current relationships but also the perception of oneself. Carl Jung, the eminent founder of analytical psychology, viewed detachment not as a manifestation of coldness or a superficial break, but as a complex process with deep roots. He emphasized that any emotional connection has symbolic, unconscious, and archetypal aspects. Often, when becoming attached to another person, an individual unconsciously clings to a part of themselves that they have not yet managed to integrate into their personality. Therefore, freeing oneself from this attachment is not just letting go of another, but, first of all, reuniting with oneself. This is what you have to learn: to recognize yourself in moments of pain, to restore your inner center, to let go without feelings of hatred and resentment, and most importantly, not to betray yourself. Upon completion of this path, you will not only master the tools for emotional detachment, but also achieve an understanding of the root causes that prompted this attachment. From this awareness, genuine freedom will be born. The goal is to provide real value. Your presence here is not accidental. Perhaps this is a search for answers, comfort, or guidance. Perhaps algorithms led you here, or it was a desperate search in the middle of the night. Regardless of the circumstances, what matters is that this step has been taken. Your willingness to heal speaks volumes. The path to emotional liberation certainly does not promise to be strewn with roses, because parting with emotional dependence is one of the most painful, but at the same time, one of the most transformative processes that a person can go through. It is at the intersection of emotional pain and awareness that an updated version of the personality is born, more resilient, wiser, and freer. As Jung astutely noted, it is in the darkness of suffering that the soul finds itself. Perhaps you are haunted by the feeling that no one is able to understand your pain, that thoughts of the lost person do not leave you, that memories intrusively invade your consciousness, and that some part of you still cherishes the hope for a message, a sign of attention, a return. The authors understand these feelings and recognize their depth. That is why the proposed guide is not a magic pill, but a detailed instruction to start the real process of emotional detachment. You will explore what Jung called the shadow, that part of the personality that is activated in relationships, which projects onto another person unrealized needs, unfilled emotional voids, and childhood traumas that are still bleeding. Often the problem is not the inability to let go, but the attempt to free oneself from a person without realizing which part of the personality is so strongly attached to this story. It is from this moment that true transformation begins. Emotional detachment is not just about erasing memories, but rather about deeply integrating them into the structure of the personality. This is not a call to insensitivity, but a process of healing emotional wounds that are still bleeding. Carl Jung offers a unique path to this goal, filled with symbols, self-analysis, and a deep dive into the unconscious. This journey into oneself can be painful, but each step taken brings you closer to healing. A person's inner connections are inextricably intertwined with their personal history, archetypes, and unconscious complexes, carefully studied by Jung. The key lies here. Only by recognizing the origins of your love can you free yourself from attachments without guilt, fear, or excessive pain. Dreams, as Jung asserted, are messages from the soul. What the mind cannot express in words often finds its way out in dreams. They may hold clues to understanding what prevents you from letting go of the past. Interpreting these internal signals allows you to read your own psyche, like an explorer discovering uncharted lands. The process of individuation, which is central to Jung's teachings, helps you become yourself, shedding masks, freeing yourself from dependencies and imposed roles. Emotional detachment is one manifestation of individuation, a conscious choice in favor of oneself. Gaining inner independence is the cornerstone that allows the soul not to depend on the presence or absence of other people in life. And if in moments of separation it seems that the world is collapsing, it is important to remember that this is not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter. Old, outdated parts of the personality die off, making way for future changes. This process is painful, but at the same time sacred, signifying not destruction, but rebirth. The person is not broken, they are on the path of transformation, and when this path is completed, they will become a completely different person. This study offers not only Jung's teachings, but also specific exercises, deep reflections, and questions aimed at self-knowledge. True detachment is not an external act, but an internal process, beginning with a conscious decision. I no longer want to carry the burden that does not belong to me. Perhaps the person with whom it is difficult to part is still present in life, but no longer sees or understands. Perhaps they left without saying goodbye, leaving a gaping void. Or perhaps the person is clinging to illusions, to memories of unfulfilled promises. In any case, the proposed material is intended to be not just an expert opinion from the outside, but support and guidance, like a conversation with an experienced therapist who looks into your eyes, empathizes with your pain, and offers to walk the path to healing together. In this space, there is no room for condemnation or searching for the guilty, because a deep understanding of interpersonal relationships reveals the truth. Every interaction is a reflection, a mirror, designed to highlight certain aspects of our personality. The emotional distance felt at the moment is not a punishment, but a valuable opportunity. It is a chance to see yourself as you were at the moment the attachment arose, and to realize the potential for personal growth that will open up with liberation from it. Do not feel lonely or broken, and especially do not underestimate the significance of your experiences. They are real, they deserve to be heard, understood, and transformed. The purpose of this material is not to suppress emotions, but to help in their awareness and acceptance, to go through them with courage. For only those who dare to feel the full range of experiences are able to find true healing. Common advice on emotional detachment often suggests ignoring your feelings, demonstrating ostentatious strength, or distracting yourself from them. However, this approach does not lead to healing. As Jung insightfully noted, what is not made conscious comes to us as fate. Misunderstanding the nature of attachment leads to its repetition in various forms and relationships. This material offers a different path. Instead of running away from yourself, it invites you to look inside, explore your wounds, desires, and fears. Only in this way can you free another person without dissolving into them or losing your own identity. This is the only path to free love, avoiding becoming an emotional cage. Stay until the end, because the knowledge you gain will help not only to let go of a specific person, but also to restore connection with your own strength, essence, and purpose. Emotional detachment is not the end of a love story, but the beginning of a new chapter dedicated to self-discovery. At the end of this path, an inner transformation will occur, clarity, peace, and most importantly, strength will be gained. The strength to choose yourself, to let go with love, to write a new chapter without resentment and a sense of emptiness, but with gratitude for the experience. Now that you are here, you are ready for this journey. When the soul is tired of carrying a burden that no longer belongs to it, the real journey begins, and this is your moment, your beginning, and Carl Jung will become a guide in this process. Carl Jung stated, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In the context of emotional detachment, this wise thought becomes a kind of compass, pointing in the right direction. Liberation from the shackles of past attachment begins with an awareness of the reasons for its power over consciousness. It is important not to ignore your own feelings, but to shed light on what keeps a person captive. Emotional wounds, weaknesses, and mechanisms of psychological projection. Letting go of a situation means acknowledging it, not denying it. The first step towards detachment is identifying projection. Psychologists argue that people tend to project aspects of their personality onto others that they cannot accept or integrate within themselves. In moments of strong attachment to another person, an individual often endows them with qualities that they do not recognize in themselves. For example, if someone nearby makes you feel protected, it may indicate a deep need for security. If a person feels seen and understood, it may reflect their own sense of invisibility. As a practical exercise, take a piece of paper and write down 3 qualities that you found most attractive in the other person. Then, next to each of them, honestly answer the question, do I possess this quality myself? When was the last time I demonstrated it? This process of self-analysis will help identify projections and begin the journey to freeing yourself from emotional dependence. This self-analysis exercise is designed not to compare, but to reconnect a person with themselves. Alienation begins with the realization that an individual is capable of giving themselves what they previously sought in the external world. The next stage is understanding symbolic connection. Jung argued that relationships are not just interactions on the surface, but encounters between souls that activate inner symbols. It is quite possible that a specific person embodies a maternal figure for the subject, or even the archetype of the anima or animus residing in their subconscious. This means that the pain does not always stem from the present, but is an echo of an old wound awakened through this connection. For a deeper dive into this process, the following exercise is recommended. Close your eyes and take a deep breath, then recall an emotionally charged scene with this person. Then ask yourself the questions. Does this resemble something I experienced in childhood? Which figure from my history does this remind me of? In this way, it will become clear that the suffering is caused not only by the actions of another person, but also by personal experiences. Understanding the original source of the pain deprives it of its former power. Jung emphasized that true healing comes when a person stops blaming others and enters into a dialogue with their shadow. Attachment is often a manifestation of an unresolved need, a striving of an inner part towards completeness. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering, Jung said, and clinging to relationships that have lost their value may be just such an unconscious attempt to avoid confronting a deeper wound that a person is not yet ready to address. Another exercise is recommended. Write a letter to this person not intended to be sent. Write sincerely, without any restrictions, and then read what you have written aloud. It is important to listen to your words, to the emotions that arise. Interaction between people is like a chemical reaction where each participant undergoes changes. Encounters leave a mark, but not all of them have to be eternal. It is important to be able to see a lesson in each encounter, not just a loss, in order to complete the cycle without resentment. A visualization is suggested. Imagine holding an object in your hands that symbolizes the connection with the other person. Examine it, and then release it into the river. This act activates the subconscious, allowing the soul to free itself from unnecessary burdens. Emotional detachment is seen as an expression of self-love, not as indifference. Acceptance instead of denial leads to transformation. The goal is not to become hardened, but to learn lessons, and move on. Hello, I really need you to protect me. I'm scared to be alone, and I want you to say that I'm good. I want you to love me even when I do something wrong. Do you promise you won't leave me? Inner healing requires recognizing that love, however beautiful it may be, can bring suffering and does not always remain eternal. The key here is integration, a concept deeply explored by Jung. To integrate is not to forget or avoid, but to bravely face past experiences, learn from them, and carry them within you not as a bleeding wound, but as a scar, a symbol of what has been experienced and healed. Detachment becomes the highest manifestation of this integration. To achieve this detachment, it is recommended to create an emotional timeline, marking key moments in the relationship, its beginning, transformation, and the moment when pain appeared. Next to each point, record your feelings and the lessons learned. This emotional map will allow you to see that in the story that is now causing pain, there were also bright moments, and that it has already completed its cycle. Jung reminded us of the wisdom of the soul. The pain of separation is not just sadness, it is resistance. One part of the personality realizes that letting go will lead to growth, but the other is afraid of the emptiness that will form after the loss. However, this emptiness is not an enemy, but a space for reconnecting with yourself. To combat this emptiness, a simple yet effective exercise is suggested. For 1 week, dedicate 15 minutes each evening to recording your feelings throughout the day without mentioning the name of your former partner, only your own thoughts, joys, and sorrows. This practice will help redirect your attention to yourself, restoring your connection with yourself in everyday life. Jung emphasized the importance of symbols in the healing process, and this exercise is one such symbol. Sometimes, to truly break free from the past, it is necessary to create a personal symbol of change. This could be an ordinary stone, a candle flame, or a figurine embodying a new life. It is recommended to carry this item with you, and in moments when painful memories resurface, remind yourself, this symbol represents me today, not what was lost. It is also extremely important to recognize the process of individuation that Jung spoke of. Only by abandoning imposed roles and the expectations of others can a person find the opportunity to become themselves. If the previous relationship completely defined your personality, if you lost your own self within it, if your life was lived exclusively through the prism of another person, then detachment becomes the first step on the path to freedom and authentic existence. As an effective tool, you can use affirmations, repeating every morning, I lovingly release everything that no longer supports me. Today, I choose myself. This phrase itself does not possess magical power, but when spoken with sincere intention, it will gradually begin to shape the subconscious mind. Jung asserted that any change begins in the depths of the subconscious, which means that it is necessary to pay close attention to your thoughts, words, and symbols. Daily self-suggestions can either create or destroy, and everyone deserves to build their life with love and care. It is important to remember that attachment is not synonymous with love. True love is free. It is like a river flowing without obstacles. It is given without conditions or demands. In contrast, attachment grows from feelings of anxiety, from fear of loss, loneliness, or a sense of personal inadequacy. As Jung once remarked, the greatest reward in life is the revelation of one's true self, which becomes impossible when self-esteem and identity depend on another person. An exercise in self-analysis in front of a mirror is suggested. For 2 minutes, in silence, look intently at your reflection, observing your eyes and gestures. It is important to ask yourself, what aspects of my own personality are being ignored in an effort to hold on to another person? It is recommended to record your thoughts, carefully consider them, and take concrete steps to change the situation. On this path, fluctuations are inevitable. Periods of calm will be replaced by emotional upheavals. It is important not to avoid these experiences, but to live through them as feelings open the way to healing. Do not judge yourself for tears or longing. Simply breathe, accept your emotions, and move forward. Emotional detachment can be compared to symbolic death, and any loss requires time for mourning. However, a period of mourning is always followed by rebirth. A new, authentic life begins, in which you once again become the main character in your own story. It is important to remember that no one can deprive you of your integrity and self-sufficiency. Carl Jung deeply believed that true loneliness stems not from physical isolation, but from the inability to share innermost thoughts and feelings that seem vitally important to us. Today, the author invites each reader to enter into a dialogue with themselves, listen carefully to their inner voice, and provide themselves with the space that was previously given to others. In moments when it seems that the world around you is collapsing, the author encourages you to take a piece of paper and write, "This pain does not define me, it transforms me." This phrase should be repeated whenever necessary, as it reflects a profound truth. You are in the process of transformation, and this is perhaps the bravest thing you can do. Achieving this awareness, choosing the path of healing, is already a significant victory. Jung asserted that the most difficult journey is the journey within oneself. But it is this journey that brings the greatest benefit, for it is in the depths of yourself that you can find not only detachment from worldly concerns, but also the deepest love for yourself. In conclusion, the author proposes a kind of interactive exercise. If this video touched your soul, if something you heard resonated with you, you are invited to leave the phrase, "I am no longer what I lost, I am what I learned," in the comments, which symbolizes acceptance of experience and growth above oneself. An author should write sincerely, for when a person finds the courage to let go of the past, they cease to be driven by circumstances and become the architect of their own destiny. Carl Jung asserted that any emotional connection that brings suffering prompts the individual toward the process of individuation. Despite the pain, this is not a tragedy, but a chance to stop seeking support in the external world and begin building it within oneself. Every time a person relies on another for self-esteem, they give away a part of their strength, independence, and emotional life. Detachment, on the other hand, allows one to reclaim this power, which has always rightfully belonged to them. Jung spoke of the self, an inner center transcending the ego, reminding us that each person is called to know this important part of their being. However, emotional attachment, especially when chronic, hinders the ability to see this center, distancing one from their true purpose. When relationships become the meaning of life, a person relinquishes the right to be themselves. Therefore, letting go does not mean giving up on love, it means returning to oneself. Freud, though differing in opinion with Jung, also considered the theme of attachment, believing that it often arises from unresolved unconscious fixations rooted in childhood. People tend to fixate on problems that did not receive timely resolution, which in adulthood manifests in the repetition of certain behavioral patterns in a quest for emotional completion. However, as Jung emphasized, true completion is achieved not through repetition but through healing of the soul's wounds. His revolutionary idea that the most important meetings have been planned by the souls before the bodies see each other, while seemingly mystical, contains a deep psychological truth. Every connection that arises on life's path provides a unique opportunity for personal growth and learning. When the learning process ceases and the connection brings only suffering, it indicates that the connection has fulfilled its function. In such a case, detachment should be viewed not as a failure, but as a kind of emotional graduation certificate, marking the completion of a certain stage. Erich Fromm, the author of the famous The Art of Loving, spoke of mature love as a feeling in which a person retains their individuality and independence. He contrasted this with immature love, which is expressed by the formula, "I love you because I need you." Mature love, according to Fromm, sounds different. I need you because I love you. Love based on need easily turns into a prison, and emotional attachment becomes a form of slavery, skillfully disguised as romantic feelings. Emotional distancing is not an attempt to erase past events from memory, but rather a profound process of re-evaluating and reinterpreting them. It is a manifestation of inner strength and maturity, the ability to face the truth and acknowledge that a certain person has undoubtedly left a mark on life, but does not have the right to dictate its future direction. As Carl Jung asserted, unconscious motives cease to control a person only when they become aware of them. Consequently, this process is not only emotional, but also spiritual, affecting deep psychological aspects. Viktor Frankl, an eminent psychiatrist who survived the horrors of concentration camps, emphasized, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." This is precisely what is happening now, an internal transformation. It is impossible to change the actions of someone who has left or who no longer feels mutual feelings, but it is quite possible to change one's attitude toward life and learn to exist without them. Jung viewed suffering from a different angle, believing that pain is not an error or punishment, but rather a pointer, a compass that helps to see those parts of oneself that need attention. Therefore, when experiencing suffering due to loss or unrequited love, it is worth perceiving it not as an enemy, but as a wise mentor striving to teach an important lesson. As a practical exercise, the following is suggested. Each time a feeling of pain arises, do not avoid it. So, when faced with emotional turmoil, stop and deeply consider what feelings are hidden behind this pain. Perhaps it is longing, anxiety, a feeling of inner emptiness or oppressive loneliness. It is important to fix this feeling, give it a specific name. After all, as soon as a person gains the ability to name their pain, they begin to gradually free themselves from its shackles. Emotional detachment, in essence, represents the process of the soul acquiring its own language. One of the most profound ideas bequeathed by Carl Jung is the concept of the alchemical transformation of the soul. Just as medieval alchemists sought to transform base lead into precious gold, each person is capable of transforming their pain into wisdom. However, this process requires passing through the fire of discomfort. It is necessary to immerse oneself in silence, withdraw from the outside world, and stop looking for ready-made answers externally. Alfred Adler, another prominent psychologist, emphasized the importance of finding a purpose to overcome suffering. He believed that many people cling to their pain because they do not have a clear life plan. When a person is not aware of their identity and does not understand where they are going, any attachment can become a burden, and any loss can turn into a real disaster. Emotional detachment begins with making a decision to create a life filled with personal meaning and genuine interest. As a practical exercise, it is suggested to formulate 3 goals that will be exclusively yours and not depend on anyone else. These goals do not have to be grandiose, but they should be meaningful, bring a sense of life, and inspire new achievements. What are you interested in exploring? What would you like to study or create? Emotional detachment becomes easier and more natural when a person begins to fill their life with their own meaning and content. Carl Jung, a prominent thinker, put forward the concept of synchronicity, arguing that there is no room for chance in the flow of life. The appearance and disappearance of each person in our life carries a specific purpose. Not all relationships are destined to last forever. Some are fleeting, as if called to open up new horizons for us or remind us of forgotten facets of our personality. Jung offered a profound thought that can change our perception of breakups. Until we realize the contents of our inner world, we will perceive what is happening as an inevitable fate that powerfully controls our lives. If a recurring scenario is traced in a relationship, if pain returns again and again, this is a clear signal of the need to delve into self-analysis and take responsibility for your emotions. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, spoke about the phenomenon of compulsive repetition, when people unconsciously play out the same life dramas in the hope of resolving an internal conflict. Jung went further, arguing that the true path to healing lies through the integration of the shadow, accepting those aspects of our personality that are still bleeding, that are experiencing fear and desperately need healing. It is proposed to perform a symbolic exercise aimed at awareness and restoration of emotional independence. It is recommended to take a sheet of paper and draw a circle on it. Inside the circle, you should list all the losses associated with a specific person. whether it is a feeling of love, security, camaraderie, or a sense of recognition. Then outside the circle, it is necessary to make a list of ways in which a person can independently replenish these needs. This scheme will be the starting point for achieving emotional autonomy. Depth psychology emphasizes that the unconscious has a continuous influence on a person's behavior, often imperceptible to himself. Every choice, every experience, and every thought are formed under the influence of ingrained patterns of behavior. Emotional detachment is a process of reprogramming these models, transforming the internal scenario, and rethinking personal history. Erich Fromm emphasized that true love should not be a source of suffering. If a relationship constantly causes pain, then it is probably not about love, but about an unmet need, fear, or projection. Carl Jung, in turn, argued that true love arises when two whole personalities meet, and not when two halves seek in each other the missing elements to feel complete. A common mistake in emotional detachment is trying to suppress your feelings. However, as Jung said, resistance only strengthens what is resisted. Therefore, it is important not to fight the emotions that arise. If you feel pain, you should allow it to manifest. If there is longing, you need to accept this feeling. The main thing is not to act impulsively, but to observe your experiences, analyze them, and make informed decisions based on awareness. In a farewell letter to the former version of yourself, gratitude and hope sound. This letter is addressed to that part of the personality that once clung to the past, to painful connections, to outdated beliefs. The author lovingly says goodbye to this version, recognizing her strength and resilience in the trials experienced. But now it's time to let her go, because the personality has changed, awakened to a new reality. In the search for keys to the unconscious, the author turns to Jung's teachings and advises writing down their dreams every morning. Dreams can harbor symbols, recurring images, faces, and places that reflect the soul's deeper processes. It is important to heed these messages, as the soul often tries to convey what the mind is not yet ready to accept. The body is also a source of valuable information. Jung asserted that the body somatizes what the mind suppresses. Anxiety, tension, insomnia, these are all signals that cannot be ignored. The author urges us not to suppress these sensations, but to listen to them attentively. Meditation, quiet walks, conscious breathing, all help to free the body from emotional burdens it no longer needs to carry. In this process, it is important to remember that you don't need to have all the answers right away. Detachment is not a one-time event, but a long journey. Each day that a person chooses not to return to what caused pain, they win a small victory. Tears are not a sign of weakness, and longing is not a sign of failure. Feelings are an integral part of the journey to healing. The main thing is not to stop, to keep moving forward, even when it hurts. Jung said that when the soul needs healing, it creates circumstances that force a person to look inside themselves. Perhaps by losing someone, a person gets a chance to find themselves. The universe uses this method to guide them on the path of self-discovery and healing. At this moment, everyone is in the process of deep self-analysis, discovering new facets of their personality and rethinking previous ideas about themselves. Do not underestimate the importance of this stage, because the changes that are taking place have a much deeper meaning than it may seem at first glance. In fact, it is about rebirth. As a rule, people who experience strong emotional dependence have faced feelings of abandonment or emotional dissatisfaction in the past. Carl Jung argued that any unresolved childhood trauma transforms into a kind of symbol, attracting similar situations. This is not a punishment, but rather a certain behavioral pattern. If this trauma is not healed, the subconscious will reproduce it over and over again until the person becomes aware of it and decides to move on, refusing to repeat the painful experience. Many people do not realize that emotional dependence is often fueled by a false belief, the belief that further existence is impossible without a certain person. However, this thought is not innate. It was brought in from the outside, perhaps under the influence of the family environment, where a person's value was determined through the prism of another, or as a result of a past loss which created a feeling of impossibility of a full life without the lost one. Jung emphasized that the starting point on the path to healing is a critical rethinking of one's own deeply rooted beliefs. When a person decides to emotionally distance themselves from another, they do not suffer a loss, but rather regain control over their inner world. In the place where dependence previously reigned, a fertile emptiness arises, providing an opportunity for personal growth. This space becomes the most valuable asset, the soul, requiring care and attention. Only by freeing oneself from outside influence does a person acquire the ability to build their own authentic life. This process is a restructuring of the entire emotional system. As Jung stated, the unconscious acts autonomously, which often leads to the repetition of undesirable behavioral patterns. An example is the obsessive desire to write to a person with whom it was decided to break up, or the irresistible desire to follow their life on social networks, looking for signs of past intimacy where they no longer exist. These manifestations do not make a person weak, but only emphasize their human nature. However, there comes a moment when it is necessary to direct the energy spent on maintaining painful connections to breaking them. One of the most important but often ignored elements of detachment is experiencing grief. Many seek to avoid this stage, but grief is not a punishment, but rather a bridge connecting the past and the future, I. It is impossible to jump over this bridge. It must be overcome gradually, step by step. Each tear shed becomes not a sign of weakness, but evidence of the purification of the soul, freeing itself from the burden of past attachments. In the works of Carl Jung, the archetype of the hero appears before us as a metaphor for a life path full of trials and transformations. This is the story of a person who bravely faces suffering, passes through the crucible of chaos, and returns to themselves renewed. Each of us at certain moments in life becomes this hero. Difficult times, no matter how dark they may seem, are a kind of sacred cave, a place of initiation and transformation, and every step towards detachment from destructive connections is a symbol of the sword with which we fight our own emotional ignorance. Overcoming one's shadow with the light of awareness leads to wholeness. In therapeutic practice, it's common to see people mistakenly interpret emotional intensity as love. All-consuming relationships are often seen as signs of authenticity and depth. However, Jung cautioned against this, emphasizing that a soul without boundaries is susceptible to illness. The intensity of feelings, dramatic experiences, and obsession are not synonymous with love. Often it's merely the shadow seeking attention due to unmet needs and unspoken desires. It's crucial to recognize that the human brain doesn't differentiate between real and emotional threats. Therefore, detaching from a painful relationship can cause intense physical pain. The limbic system, responsible for our emotions, reacts to a breakup as a loss of something vital. But this isn't death, it's rebirth. The pain we experience is a sign of profound changes and restructuring. The goal isn't to avoid this pain, but to accept it and navigate through it, supporting ourselves along the way. Scientists have convincingly demonstrated that it takes the human body between 3 weeks and 3 months to break an emotional bond formed in a relationship. Each day that someone finds the strength to resist the urge to return to the past, they rebuild their emotional structure. Carl Jung, a prominent psychologist, emphasized that any transformation takes time, and the soul needs specific rituals to complete life stages. This raises the question, what ritual will you choose for yourself? Will you burn a letter full of memories? Will you take a walk in silence to reflect on what happened? Or perhaps immerse yourself in a new project to distract from sad thoughts? The soul needs a clear signal that the old is ending and the new is beginning. Often, attachment to the past is mistaken for loyalty. A person may think that letting go of another betrays the moments shared. However, Jung taught that true loyalty isn't about being devoted to another person, but to oneself and one's truth. If a relationship has ceased to bring joy and has become a source of constant pain, letting it go isn't betrayal, but an act of self-love and respect for one's dignity. It's important to remember that the unconscious mind perceives the world symbolically, not logically. Therefore, simply making a decision at the rational level isn't enough to complete a cycle. It's necessary to experience it emotionally through symbolic actions. For example, you can change the decor in your bedroom, renovate, or get rid of items that remind you of the past. This isn't an escape from problems, but a cleansing of mental space. In doing so, a person sends a signal to their unconscious that a new chapter in life is beginning. In Jungian psychology, self-esteem is understood as more than just self-admiration. It's a deep connection with one's essence. It's an awareness of one's identity that doesn't depend on external factors, whether interpersonal relationships, professional achievements, or life failures. When a person defines themselves through the lens of others, they risk losing their individuality. Detachment from this dependence becomes not just the end of a relationship, but a process of restoring one's personality. Modern psychologists increasingly note that one of the main problems of our time is the acute need for constant approval. This trend is fueled by social media, where likes and comments become a measure of value, and it's also evident in romantic relationships, where the need for validation is particularly strong. Dependence in relationships is often reinforced by a desperate search for recognition, but external approval can never bring a sense of fulfillment. True recognition comes from within, when a person can look at themselves and say, "I am good enough," even if no one else sees it. Liberation from external dependence opens the way for amazing changes. A person begins to listen to their inner voice, which was previously drowned out by the desire to please others. Carl Jung called this voice the wisdom of the unconscious, asserting that by learning to hear ourselves, we will find answers to questions we have sought in vain in the external world. Self-love is formed not based on motivational slogans, but through concrete actions, daily decisions, how we talk to ourselves, take care of ourselves, and show respect for our personality. When a person experiences a period of detachment from another, it opens a unique opportunity to deepen the connection with themselves. It's not just about acceptance, but about cultivating a deep respect for the inner strength that allowed them to let go of what was dear. The bitter truth of life is that some people enter our lives not to stay forever, but to act as catalysts for awakening. Not every story has to end with a happy ending to be meaningful. Sometimes brief encounters have a more profound impact than relationships that last for decades. As Jung would say, these people fulfill an archetypal role, appearing to shake our unconscious and push us towards awareness. In the process of detachment, there inevitably comes a moment when the silence becomes deafening. However, by learning to accept it, one discovers that it is not empty at all, but filled with one's own self. This time can be filled with new activities, self-reflection, and personal rituals. It is important that life no longer revolves around the absent person, but becomes a story of personal rebirth. Guilt often becomes one of the main obstacles on the path to detachment. Guilt for letting go, for moving forward, for leaving the past behind. However, guilt is just an echo of an old story that is no longer relevant. Jung argued that an important part of the process of individuation is the ability to forgive oneself, not for mistakes, but for neglecting one's own needs and well-being for so long. The narrative of life's journey does not end at the current stage. The trials a person faces are not the final point, but rather a starting point for a new page in their personal story. On this page, they become the conscious author of their destiny, where their decisions carry weight and their inner voice sounds confident. The soul is no longer languishing in the prison of memories of the past, but is saturated with the fullness of the present moment. Each awakening becomes a sacred act reminding us of the value of life. It is important to remember that everything experienced, even moments of pain and misunderstanding, carries a hidden meaning. Emotional liberation is not just a break with the past, but an acceptance of the fact that fate has other plans in store. Perhaps their meaning is still elusive, but in time awareness will come and the heart will be filled with gratitude and peace. Having reached this point, it is worth pausing and taking a deep breath. One is closer than ever to finding their true self, to being able to remember the past without pain, with a sense of gratitude, to love without dependence, and to live in complete freedom. And if a sign is needed, here it is. Carl Jung, a prominent thinker, argued that immature love tends to project onto another person those qualities and aspirations that the individual does not recognize or accept in themselves. Often, when entering a relationship, a person loves not the personality itself, but the image it symbolizes. This image may represent the recognition that was so lacking, the need for refuge, or other unmet needs. Jung called this phenomenon archetypal projection, when unintegrated aspects of the personality are projected into the external world. Detachment opens the eyes to the true essence of both the other person and oneself, freeing one from the power of illusions and assumptions. The shadow, a cornerstone of Jungian psychology, plays a crucial role in understanding the difficulties that arise during separation. According to Jung, in close relationships, our shadow inevitably awakens, the totality of everything we deny, suppress, or reject in ourselves. The loss of a partner is painful not only because of their absence, but also because of the confrontation with one's own shadow, from which there is no longer anywhere to run. In contrast to seeking distractions, the practice of daily self-analysis is offered. Every evening one should analyze situations that caused a strong reaction, asking oneself questions. What part of my personality was affected? What emotional wound was opened? Jung also introduced the concepts of anima and animus, representing the feminine principle in a man and the masculine principle in a woman, respectively. Often, attachment arises because the partner activates internal energy that is out of balance. For example, attraction to an authoritarian male figure may indicate a need to develop one's own leadership potential. Attachment to a maternal figure may be dictated by the search for emotional protection. Achieving detachment becomes possible through the harmonization of these internal energies, eliminating the need to project them onto another person. The profound legacy left by Jung lies in the understanding that at the very heart of every emotional wound lies the potential for transformation. The great thinker argued that it is through suffering that the path to personal growth and self-improvement is paved. Therefore, when the soul is gripped by a painful feeling, when the inner void threatens to engulf one's entire being, one should perceive this not as a curse, but as a harbinger of impending change, as a signal of the beginning of the process of awareness and spiritual development. Don't resist this process, instead go through it, carefully listening to yourself and asking the question, what kind of person am I becoming because of this trial? The process of freeing oneself from old attachments and painful memories is not limited to the superficial level of consciousness. Jung insisted that genuine changes occur in the depths of the unconscious, where logic and rational analysis are powerless. Healing requires more powerful tools, symbols, rituals, moments of silence, and a deep inner confrontation with oneself. As a practical step, it is suggested to find an image, object, or word that will represent the new life path. This symbol should be made your talisman, carried with you, talked to, and turned into an anchor that keeps you from returning to the past. In this way, a person turns to their unconscious, declaring, I no longer need to seek support in someone else. I am my own support. Jung believed that it is through overcoming difficulties that the soul gains the opportunity to evolve and reach new heights. In modern society, suffering is often seen as something undesirable, and people try to avoid it at all costs. However, paradoxically, it is difficulties and trials that have the most profound, formative impact on the individual, contributing to spiritual awakening and self-discovery. Moments when the familiar world collapses become a catalyst for transformation and growth. Therefore, if you feel depressed today, don't judge yourself. It is important to realize that you are in the middle of an important renewal process, shedding the old shell to gain a new life. Despite the temporary pain and discomfort, in the future you will be able to gratefully remember this period, understanding that it was thanks to the difficulties you experienced that you were able to return to yourself, to your true essence. Swiss psychiatrist and philosopher Carl Jung emphasized the importance of emotional solitude, especially in a world where people are expected to be constantly active, demonstrating success and ostentatious strength. Jung urged, stop, listen to yourself, immerse yourself in your inner world, for it is in solitude that the soul finds order and harmony. Think about how long it has been since you allowed yourself to spend at least one day without distractions, without constantly checking your phone and looking for answers in the outside world. Perhaps you should schedule a meeting with yourself this week. Disconnect from external stimuli and return to your inner self. Such a reboot is more necessary for you than you can imagine. A little-known but profound saying of Carl Jung states, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This thought is fundamental to the process of detachment. When a person is overwhelmed by waves of anger, disappointment, or resentment directed at a particular person, it is important not to indulge these feelings but to carefully observe them. The purpose of this observation is not to justify negative emotions, but to understand which part of a person's inner world desperately needs to be heard. Often the pain of detachment is caused not so much by the fact of loss as by unsaid words and unmade decisions. It is necessary to allow yourself an honest conversation with yourself in order to understand the true causes of emotional discomfort. For deep healing, Jung advised establishing contact with the inner child, that wounded part of the personality that often unconsciously influences decisions. As a practical exercise, you can try writing a letter from your adult self to yourself at the age of 7. In this letter, you should explain the reasons why you are deciding to let go of another person and say to yourself what you once needed to hear so much. Often, painful attachment is a manifestation of the longing of a wounded inner child who passionately wants someone to stay close and not repeat the experience of past losses. However, now this child has the person themselves who can become the very support they need so much. And this fundamentally changes the situation. Before we delve into a story that can turn all our previous ideas upside down, let's reinforce the material we've covered with a powerful statement full of determination and sincerity. If this video has touched the strings of your soul, if you feel your consciousness is being freed from the shackles of the past, we invite you to capture the following phrase in the comments. Today, I grant myself freedom from everything that is no longer mine. Let this declaration sound to the whole world, but more importantly, let it become your personal manifesto. You are embarking on a path to a new life, and we will be your faithful companions on this journey. Emotionally detaching from another person is an incredibly courageous act that only the strong-spirited are capable of. It's not just about severing ties with a specific individual, but also about letting go of a part of yourself that was formed and grew in close connection with that person. From a psychological perspective, it's akin to a symbolic death, the fading of an archetype that lived within you. However, as we know, any symbolic death is preceded by a psychological rebirth. Today you stand on the threshold, crossing the portal between the old version of yourself and the one you are destined to become. Modern psychological science confirms the idea that the most profound emotional impact comes from relationships that awaken dormant, unresolved behavioral patterns rooted in the past. Attachment theory, developed by the eminent scientist John Bowlby, convincingly demonstrates a direct correlation between the nature of our adult relationships and how we interacted with key attachment figures in our childhood years. In this regard, the painful experiences caused by alienation are due not only to the current loss, but also to the resurrection of old, unexperienced losses, deeply rooted in our psyche. Even Carl Jung, a perceptive explorer of the human soul, anticipated this connection, speaking of the existence of a wounded inner child within each of us. Karen Horney, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, suggested that the driving force in the search for love for many people is not so much a sincere desire as an acute need for recognition, dictated by the fear of being rejected and all-consuming existential anxiety. When love stems from need, a person inevitably becomes dependent on the object of their affection. In this context, emotional detachment appears as a manifestation of maturity, as the ability to love without seeking possession, to let go without feeling imminent doom. Viktor Frankl, the founder of logotherapy, emphasized that having a clear why allows a person to endure almost any how. This is the key point. If, in the process of detachment, a person does not realize a clear goal for which they are letting go, the pain may seem unbearable. However, when the understanding comes that letting go is necessary to find oneself, to break free from the shackles of the past, and to heal emotional wounds, then the pain transforms into a necessary stage on the path to achieving a more meaningful goal. Carl Rogers, the recognized father of the person-centered approach. His reasoning echoed the idea of a peculiar paradox of human existence. Only by recognizing and accepting oneself in the fullness of the present moment does a person open the gates to genuine change. Emotional detachment, in his opinion, requires just such unconditional acceptance. Acceptance of pain, past mistakes, and love, even if not ideal, but which played its indispensable role in shaping the personality, leading to the current point of real transformation. Recalling Jung's words about the process of individuation, he spoke of integrating all aspects of the personality into a single whole, of transforming into a complete being. He emphasized that such unity cannot be achieved by remaining in relationships that only feed shortcomings instead of helping to overcome them. Detachment, in his view, is a spiritual, emotional, and psychological tool that promotes progress toward this inner center. Erich Fromm, in his work Escape from Freedom, warned against the common tendency of people to prefer dependent relationships to facing the emptiness of their own autonomy. This deep-seated fear of loneliness, the fear of losing oneself without another person, is, in his opinion, the main obstacle to personal growth. However, when a person decides to go through a period of self-analysis and remains alone with themselves, something amazing happens. They realize that to achieve integrity, they do not need the presence of another person. Loneliness, contrary to popular belief, appears not as an adversary, but as a valuable mentor. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung argued that loneliness arises not from physical isolation, but from the inability to share with others what is truly important to a person. True self-sufficiency makes it possible to establish a connection with oneself, to discover one's inner world, and based on this to build healthier, more sincere, and lasting relationships with others. In the context of psychotherapy, the concept of expanding consciousness takes on special significance. Jung urged people to integrate their shadow, to recognize their fears, hidden desires, and unexpressed needs. Emotional detachment contributes to the expansion of consciousness as a person ceases to act automatically, reacting to external stimuli, and begins to make conscious choices. It's worth pondering how many times a person remains in a relationship solely out of fear of change. This fear is natural, but it shouldn't paralyze or prevent someone from moving forward. Transformation is an integral part of personal progress. Alfred Adler, a prominent figure in individual psychology, asserted that within each of us lies an inner energy guiding us toward constant self-improvement. Releasing oneself from unnecessary connections is one of the most effective manifestations of this power. When a person stubbornly clings to a relationship that no longer aligns with their inner world, they hinder their further development and, in a way, pause the flow of their life energy. Carl Jung spoke of soul stagnation that arises when an individual avoids going through painful yet necessary stages of life. The soul, like water, needs continuous movement. If the movement ceases, stagnation occurs, leading to illness. Letting go of what is outdated is a process of cleansing the soul, promoting the renewal of life's flow. The ego, according to Jung, plays an important role in daily life. However, when it takes over and begins to dominate, it hinders our evolution. The ego resists separation, always striving to be right, to win, and to possess. In contrast, the soul yearns for freedom. Someone with the ability to let go doesn't demonstrate weakness, but rather the capacity to overcome egoistic impulses. Many modern psychotherapists use the body as a tool to facilitate emotional processes. The body often expresses what the mind keeps silent. Chest pains, sleep disturbances, anxiety, nausea, all can be echoes of unreleased attachments, a unique reverberation of unresolved emotional conflicts. Releasing emotional charge involves not only verbal expression of feelings, but also active involvement of the body in the process, whether it's dancing, running, crying, or deep breathing. it's important to allow emotions to manifest in their full variety of forms. Abraham Maslow, the creator of the famous hierarchy of needs, asserted that a person achieves self-actualization by satisfying their basic needs and striving to unlock their potential. Often, people mistakenly place romantic love at the foundation of their emotional hierarchy. When a relationship crumbles, it seems the world around them is also falling apart. Distancing oneself from the situation provides an opportunity to rethink and rebuild this pyramid from within, regaining oneself as the foundation. Inner dialogue is one of the most underestimated tools in the process of emotional detachment. Carl Jung said that the inner world of every person is filled with voices, symbols, and internal contradictions. What words do we say to ourselves daily? What stories do we support and develop in our minds? Do we address ourselves with compassion or judgment? It is necessary to learn to recognize our inner critic and replace it with a guiding voice, a wise and understanding inner voice. According to Carl Rogers' approach, authenticity is key to healing. It's impossible to detach from a situation while continuing to suppress one's true feelings. A person cannot easily give something up, claiming its insignificance, while deep down a flame of emotions rages. It's essential to acknowledge and accept one's own feelings, openly stating, "Yes, I am in pain. Yes, it was dear to my heart. Yes, it has deeply wounded me." Only through sincerity and honesty with oneself can true freedom be found. People who can let go of the past with love realize that life is not about striving for control, but rather following the natural flow of events. Carl Jung, an outstanding thinker, had a deep spiritual understanding of human existence. He believed that fate is shaped by the unconscious, but also by the desire for meaning in life. Letting go, according to Jung, is a manifestation of trust in the universe, confidence that it has a deeper understanding of what is happening and that something leaving life always has its reason. In clinical practice, the analysis of recurring life scenarios is widely used. This method involves studying one's emotional history to identify typical traits of attracted people, recurring conflicts, and prevailing emotions. Jung called this the circle of fate. Breaking this vicious circle is only possible through awareness of the existing pattern. If a person has experienced deep love and is currently suffering, this experience shouldn't be considered useless. Every experience leaves its mark, but it is up to the individual to decide whether that mark becomes an unhealed wound or a scar that no longer causes pain. Emotional detachment helps transform a wound into a scar. It teaches you to look at the world without tears, to remember the past without agonizing pain, to express gratitude without humiliating requests. In Jung's teachings, a special place is occupied by the concept of the integrity of the personality. A person reaches completeness only when he unites all his opposites, light and shadow, love and loneliness, attachment and freedom. Detachment in this context is the art of integration, the ability to love without seeking to possess, to remember without dwelling on the past, to let go without losing oneself. If the reader has reached these lines and continues to delve into each word with a sincere heart, then it is worth telling him something important that he may not have heard yet. He is fulfilling a sacred mission, bravely facing his pain, which is a rare quality because most people prefer flight. But he is not like that. His courage, with which he crosses the threshold of suffering, makes him incredibly strong. The emotions he experiences while trying to break free from the past are not only his personal experiences, but also an echo from the depths of generations. As Jung said, there are collective archetypes, universal psychic energies that permeate time and are passed down from ancestors to descendants. It is possible that the difficulty of letting go of a situation is related to inherited patterns of behavior, to family stories where neglect, dependence, or self-sacrifice were commonplace. And now, thanks to the awakened consciousness, the reader has the opportunity to break this vicious circle, committing an act that his ancestors could not bring themselves to do. A person's emotional life is a complex web of attractions, which Freud described as a confrontation between instinctive desires, ID, the conscious I, ego, and moral principles, superego. Jung expanded this vision by adding the concept of self as an integrating center. When a person is emotionally attached to someone, their ego often comes into conflict with the self. The conscious part understands the need to let go, but the soul has not yet learned the lesson. Therefore, liberation from attachment requires not logical conclusions, but deep emotional awareness. In many ancient cultures, the act of farewell was a sacred ritual. People burned things, sang, mourned the loss in a circle of loved ones. In the modern world, emotional suffering is experienced in silence, often with shame, but the reader can change this tradition. Let his release become a ceremonial act. He can light a candle, turn on music that resonates with his soul, write about what he wants to let go of, and consign it to the symbolic fire. It is important to honor what has been experienced and celebrate the release, because the soul needs it. Relationships that cause the most pain destroy the mental structure of a person. Another becomes part of his emotional routine, automatic thoughts, and everyday physiology. Breaking free from the bonds of the past is not just stopping communication, it is a deep restructuring of thinking. Modern neuropsychological studies show that the brain forms stable neural connections through repetition. To break an emotional attachment, it is necessary to pave new paths in the mind, develop new habits, discover new places, and enrich vocabulary. The brain also needs to be given the opportunity to let go of the past. In Jungian psychology, there is the concept of a transcendent function, which is the point of contact between opposites, between the desire to stay and the need to move on, between the love that once was and the pain that must be experienced now. The ability to hold both poles without allowing one to suppress the other leads to the formation of a new consciousness. This is mature detachment, accepting internal contradictions, recognizing all aspects of experience, preserving love for the past, and letting go of what no longer exists. Emotional pain has a very tangible physical component. Scientific studies confirm that emotional loss activates the same areas of the brain as physical pain. That is why a person may experience a feeling of tightness in the chest, difficulty breathing, insomnia. This is not an exaggeration. The nervous system is experiencing mourning, and like any physical wound, it needs care, time, and emotional rest. Therapeutic writing is a powerful tool for self-knowledge and healing. This is a practice in which a person writes freely, without restrictions or self-censorship, allowing words to pour onto paper without fear or correction. In this stream of consciousness, unspoken thoughts, unlived emotions, and internal conflicts find a way out, which continue to echo in the depths of the soul. After completing the letter, it is recommended to read it aloud, addressing yourself as a person from the future who has already found healing and wisdom. This approach allows you to look at your problems from a fresh perspective, detached and compassionate. Writing becomes a bridge between the conscious and unconscious, opening access to hidden corners of the inner world and shedding light on the true causes of emotional suffering. In this clarity and understanding, a sense of freedom and control over your life is born. In the context of Carl Jung's theory of complexes, a complex is not viewed as something exclusively negative, but rather as an unconscious emotional structure capable of strongly influencing a person's behavior and mental state. For example, an abandonment complex may push someone to maintain relationships that have long ceased to be healthy and fulfilling out of fear of reliving the pain of rejection. Awareness and understanding of one's complexes is an important step towards mature and conscious choices. When a person identifies the source of their pain, it ceases to be a frightening monster and turns into a valuable life lesson. To deepen self-analysis, it is suggested to perform the following exercise. Imagine yourself at the age of 8, standing opposite you. Look into the eyes of this child and ask what they need, what worries them. Then imagine yourself at the age of 80, also standing opposite you. Listen to the wisdom of this old person who has already gone through many trials and knows that everything is transient and the most important thing is inner peace and harmony with oneself. After that, it is important to make a choice. Who to listen to more? The wounded child who is afraid of loneliness, or the wise elder who knows that everything passes and that the most important thing is the inner world. Each person decides for themselves which part of their soul they want to serve. Love dictated by need and necessity ceases to be true love and turns into dependence. When relationships with another person are based on satisfying one's own needs, love becomes transactional, losing its unconditional nature and sincerity. Carl Jung deeply believed that genuine wholeness of personality blossoms only when love stems from inner wealth and self-sufficiency. It's not a selfish, "I need you to feel happy," but rather a generous, "I am happy on my own, and from this fullness I share with you what I am." It is this kind of love that heals, not wounds, creates, not destroys. One of the most common mistakes when breaking up is the desire to complete the process as quickly as possible. However, Jung emphasized that the soul lives not in linear time, but in symbolic time. This means that the emotional pain a person experiences today does not have a specific statute of limitations. Healing is not a matter of weeks. It is a process of deep inner transformations, and each such process is unique. Therefore, it is important to choose patience and respect your own rhythm. Systemic psychologists rightly point out that every relationship is a complex system. When one element of this system changes, the entire structure transforms. If a person decides to let go of the past, even if the other participant in the relationship does not change, this already has an impact on the entire system. And when a person changes themselves, the universe seems to adapt to these changes. Do not underestimate the power of a single decision made by the soul, because it can trigger a chain of deep and irreversible changes. At this stage of life, you are not alone. Myriads of people have experienced similar emotional pain, and everyone who consciously accepted it became stronger in spirit, wiser, and freer. The key difference between those who find healing and those who repeatedly experience suffering lies in the willingness to look within themselves. This important step has already been taken. In positive psychology, there is the concept of resilience, which means the ability to transform pain into a source of strength. However, resilience does not imply invulnerability. On the contrary, it requires the ability to accept one's feelings and acknowledge one's own fragility. As Jung argued, a healthy psyche is not one that never knows falls, but one that knows how to rise again, enriched by experience, humility, and love for oneself. Forgiveness, although it may seem paradoxical, is also an important part of the liberation process. This is not about forced forgiveness, but about forgiveness that is born from deep understanding. To forgive is not to justify the harm done, but to free oneself from the burden that one carries due to the inability to change the past. Sometimes the most difficult thing is to forgive yourself for staying in a difficult situation for so long, for trying to do everything possible. It is important to remember that at that moment you acted based on your then current level of awareness. Every night, it is worth performing a special ritual in front of the mirror, looking into the depths of your own eyes and saying words full of strength and intention. I am learning to lovingly let go of everything that has ceased to be a source of my life energy. I am choosing myself. It doesn't matter how sincere these words sound at the beginning of the journey. Repeating this phrase is like planting seeds, each of which, being a seed of self-love, will eventually sprout and blossom. Many psychologists agree that genuine changes in a person's life often occur in moments of crisis. Carl Jung, a prominent psychologist and philosopher, stated, "Chaos is that fertile ground where the soul finds new birth." Do not be afraid of periods of confusion and uncertainty, because they are harbingers of future clarity and understanding. A person emerges from a crisis renewed, like a bird whose wings instinctively know the direction of flight. It is important to remember that letting go of the old is not a punishment, but rather a preparation for something bigger and more meaningful, for opportunities that remained inaccessible while a person was attached to what had already exhausted its usefulness. The human soul intuitively understands this, and the task is for the mind to accept this truth. If these words resonated in your soul, If something new began to awaken inside, you should express it by leaving a phrase full of liberation and confidence in the comments. I am a free soul, and today I give myself permission to move forward, shedding the shackles of the past. In the process of writing, a person formulates their beliefs, and by declaring them, they begin to embody them in life. If the listener carefully delved into every word, every idea, and every instruction, then they are no longer the person who started watching. Changes have taken place inside them. Perhaps a light of hope has been ignited, an old wound has made itself known, or a dormant wisdom has awakened. It is important not to ignore these changes, but to listen to yourself, because what a person feels now is not an accident, but an echo of their true essence. Earlier, detachment was mentioned as a path to liberation, but emotional detachment is also an act of rebirth. A person rises from the ashes, freeing themselves from the chains that bind their self-esteem to others. They move towards a state where love does not require approval, salvation, or external support. This is a return to oneself, to one's inner home. There is no more significant revolution than a person's decision to heal. The world is full of people repeating the same mistakes, clinging to hopeless relationships and begging for love. But the listener chooses a different, more difficult, but noble, sincere, and transformative path. They become a person who loves not out of need, but out of freedom. This is the true manifestation of self-love. It is important to remember this whenever there is a feeling of regression. You should realize that the current moment is not a starting point from scratch, but a beginning based on the rich experience of the past. Everything experienced, including moments of pain and disappointment, plays its role in shaping personality. Every tear shed, every painful silence, and every sleepless night has its purpose. They teach a person that they themselves can be their reliable home, that they do not need someone from the outside to feel their wholeness, because they have always been complete, although they may have temporarily forgotten about it. As the prominent psychologist Carl Jung said, it is impossible to know the light without going through the shadow. And the person has gone this way, overcoming dark times, meeting their fears face to face, and looking into the depths of their emotional wounds. This is what makes them a mature and complete personality, not perfect but brave, not invulnerable but conscious. In this state, detachment from something or someone is no longer a loss, but an important stage of evolution. Many people spend their lives running from pain, but they look it in the eye, embrace it, and transform it into a source of strength. This is emotional maturity. The person has stopped looking for culprits in their problems and has begun to take responsibility for their life. They have stopped blaming others for what they lack and have begun to give themselves what they deserve. They have begun the process of healing, and this is truly wonderful. Life always rewards those who choose themselves, not out of selfish motives, but because they understand that it is impossible to give love from emptiness. This process of detachment is important not only for themselves, but also for all their future relationships, which will now be healthier, freer, and more genuine. They break the chains so that others do not inherit them. They pave the way of consciousness that many have never dared to walk. And now it is proposed to commit an act of courage if this message has touched some strings of the soul, if at some point there was a feeling that it was necessary to hear it. If something from what was said resonated in your personal history, it is proposed to leave a comment with the words, "Today I choose myself, and everything starts with me." On this day, as if giving an oath to oneself, a person confesses their boundless love for their essence, setting an anchor in the raging sea of change. When the wavering doubts try to knock him down, he will remember this moment, the day he began to free himself not only from specific people, but from everything that prevented him from being his authentic self. With a new understanding, with emotions pulsing in his chest, with a soul awakened like never before, he welcomes the future, because the best is yet to come. He will go down in history, in the chronicle of personal transformation, where Jungian archetypes become reality. It will be a story of confronting shadow and light, of overcoming pain and achieving redemption, of balancing attachment and freedom. The future is not just a narrative, but a mirror reflecting the depths of the soul. That day the heavens opened, and rain fell on the earth with fury, as if someone was holding back a scream in silence. The city was enveloped in a thick fog, as if the world was deliberately striving for opacity. In this bleak landscape, Alejandro wandered with a broken heart and a lost gaze, unable to understand whether his inner pain was bursting into tears or whether the rain was mourning his loss. It had been 4 days since he last heard her voice. 4 days since Sophia uttered the words that severed their connection. "I can't anymore. I'm tired of pretending this is working." And she left him alone. She left, as people leave who have made a decision long before that moment, without tears, without unnecessary drama. She simply disappeared. Alejandro stood in a stupor with a cup of cold coffee in his hand and a heart overflowing with pain. He didn't know what to do, scream, run after her, or just collapse to the ground like an abandoned child. But he did nothing. When the soul is broken, the body becomes paralyzed. For many years he had built his world around her. His daily routine, his dreams, his joys and fears. Everything was inextricably linked to her. And now that she was no longer there, he felt his own existence collapsing, like a house without a foundation. That night, his sleep was lost. Like a shadow, he wandered through the rooms, reliving every dialogue, every discussion, every gesture, trying to find the culprits, the origins of the discord, the omens of the future. But all his searches led to a gaping void, to a crushing silence that haunted him like a sinister spirit. At dawn, he decided on a desperate step. He wrote her a lengthy message, filled with restrained but palpable emotions, promises to transform, veiled pleas for forgiveness. But in response, he met only silence. She read his words and chose to ignore them, and this act of indifference wounded him more deeply than any cruel reproach. After all, indifference becomes the most destructive weapon when love still lives in the heart. The days dragged on agonizingly slowly, and Alejandro sank into the abyss of despair, seeing no light. He refused to eat, avoided communication, only endlessly listened to the playlist they had created together, as if these songs were the only thread connecting him to life. It was then that his friend Thomas uttered the words whose meaning then escaped Alejandro. "Alejo, you don't miss Sophia as such. You miss the image you yourself attributed to her, the feelings she awakened in you. But all this is inside you, not in her herself." Alejandro shot him an angry look. How could he say that? How dare he belittle his suffering? But that same night, in agonizing insomnia, this phrase sounded again in his head like a persistent echo. What if there is some truth in it? What if his pain is not caused by the loss of her, but by the collapse of the illusions he placed on her? What if his emotional wound is much deeper than their relationship? The next day, almost without hope of success, Alejandro began searching the internet for ways to get rid of emotional dependence. Among the many articles, one caught his attention that mentioned Carl Jung and the concept of emotional projection. He delved into reading and felt for the first time that someone really understood his condition. Jung argued that we tend to project onto others those aspects of our own personality that we ourselves do not realize or reject. Deep down, a previously unknown door seemed to open in Alejandro's soul, revealing new horizons of self-knowledge to him. The thought arose in his head, what if Sophia was just a reflection, a mirror, in which his most secret, carefully hidden emotional wounds were refracted? Seized by a thirst for truth, he decided to delve into this issue, to begin a painstaking process of self-analysis. He immersed himself in the study of psychological literature, watched videos devoted to this topic, striving to get to the heart of what was happening. Soon he discovered the concept of the shadow, that dark, hidden part of the human psyche where all those qualities and traits that we deny and reject in ourselves are stored. Alejandro realized that his jealousy, his insecurity, his painful need for constant approval from others, this is not Sofia's fault, but only the desperate cry of his own shadow, longing to be seen and recognized. For the first time in a long time, he felt something other than pain and disappointment, curiosity. He wanted to understand himself, to figure out the reasons behind what was happening, to stop blaming others for his problems, and to discover which aspects of his personality had led him to experience this relationship as a painful addiction, skillfully disguised as love. He started keeping a diary, writing down his thoughts and feelings in a notebook every night. He didn't do it to share his experiences with anyone, but simply to see them, acknowledge them, and stop running away from himself. At first it was excruciatingly painful, like stirring up a wound, but with each word written the pain gradually lost its sharpness. It seemed that by putting his experiences on paper, he was stripping them of their power over him. He remembered a phrase he had once read by Carl Jung. "What you resist persists, what you accept transforms." And then it dawned on him. For years he had denied his fear of abandonment, suppressed his need to be seen, chosen, to feel worthy of love and attention. He began to remember his childhood, the absence of a father, the constant arguments between his parents, the feeling that love had to be earned through hard work and deserved like a reward. And suddenly he realized that Sofia hadn't abandoned him. She had merely pointed out the wound that had always been in his heart. For several days he lived with these memories, but this time they didn't weigh him down as before. It was a different weight, the weight of truth, the weight of awareness. Despite the emotional torment, the experiences unexpectedly became a source of new strength. Understanding the root cause of suffering frees you from paralyzing fear and points the way forward. It was at this turning point that the protagonist decided to seek professional support. He found a Jungian therapist. During his first meeting with the therapist, the man gave vent to his feelings, crying as uncontrollably as he hadn't allowed himself to since childhood. The reason for the tears was not only the separation from Sofia, but also the realization of the burden of unexpressed grievances, suppressed emotions, and the inability to ask for help. In therapy, the specialist introduced him to the concept of individuation. The therapist explained that the pain he was experiencing was not only suffering, but also an opportunity for personal growth, a kind of rite of passage. If Alejandro dared to face his shadow, he could be reborn as a whole, free, and authentic person. The protagonist accepted this idea not as a panacea, but as a guide to help him stay on track. Each session became an immersion into his inner world, and each time he returned from this journey, he gained a new facet of himself. He realized that Sofia had played the role of an archetype in his life, activating his anima, his emotional side, his dormant sensuality, but also his tendency to be dependent. The departure of his beloved marked the end of one stage and the beginning of another, much deeper one. Weeks passed, and one morning Alejandro noticed a change in his condition. Thoughts of Sofia no longer occupied every minute of his life. The painful tightness in his chest disappeared. Space began to appear in his inner world for himself, his dreams, his reflections, and his voice. He began to try new things, returning to running, writing, reading, listening to music without tears. He went out on the street again, not trying to find familiar features in the faces of passers-by. Step by step he returned to himself like a restorer, rebuilding a temple with his own hands. Walking one day through the shady alleys of the park, Alejandro felt the long-awaited peace that had eluded him lately. Sitting down on a bench, he took a deep breath, and it dawned on him. It wasn't about her. It was about me. A smile appeared on his face, not overshadowed by sadness but filled with gratitude, because it was the loss of Sophia that helped him find himself. Alejandro stopped seeing himself as a victim of circumstances. He became a student, carefully studying the lessons of life. Every memory, every emotion, every shadow of the past became his mentor. And although the pain still made itself known at times, it no longer destroyed him because he had learned to cope with it. His therapist suggested a final exercise, to write a letter to Sophia, not to send, but to complete the painful stage. In this letter, there was no room for resentment, only gratitude for the fact that, thanks to her, he had discovered the potential dormant within him. He completed the task, closed the notebook, lit a candle, took a deep breath, and consigned the letter to the fire, performing a ritual of liberation, not farewell. The flames consumed the words, but not the lessons, which would remain with him forever. That day, Alejandro felt not a loss, but the acquisition of something much more valuable, the ability to be alone with himself without fear, to love himself without humiliating requests, to be self-sufficient and independent. From that moment on, he realized that his story was not a tragedy, but a fascinating journey, a path of transformation and spiritual ascent. As Carl Jung said, there is no awakening of consciousness without pain. Alejandro awakened and was now ready to love himself from a new state of wholeness and freedom. Alejandro's story began, like many stories of emotional dependence, with a loss that shook his world, a breakup that not only shattered the relationship, but also forced him to face his own shadow. This was a turning point. The pain arose not only from the absence of a loved one, but also from internal changes. The loss of Sophia became not merely an external separation, but an internal fragmentation, exposing aspects of his personality that Alejandro had tried to ignore. Jung taught that every strong emotional experience is a chance for the soul to grow and develop. Alejandro's plunge into the depths of pain became the impetus for the process of individuation. The hero, without realizing it, embarks on a path of change, where the loss of Sophia becomes merely a catalyst for deep self-knowledge. Physical ailments, manifesting as insomnia, loss of appetite, and a heavy feeling in the chest, signal a deep emotional trauma. From the perspective of somatic psychology, the body perceives grief as a threat to existence. The mind interprets the loss as a catastrophe, leading to the activation of the nervous system's defense mechanisms. Unaware of this, Alejandro is experiencing a powerful reaction from the limbic system, and it is this vulnerability that creates the prerequisites for his spiritual awakening. The words of his friend Thomas, "You don't miss her, but the image you created," make him doubt his own feelings. In psychology, this can be seen as the first step towards cognitive dissonance, an internal conflict between feelings and an emerging understanding. This crack in the perception of reality becomes the foundation for further emotional transformation. Alejandro's sudden interest in the works of Jung is natural. In psychotherapeutic practice, it is often observed that in times of crisis, people begin to seek answers to fundamental questions of existence. Alejandro seeks to find meaning, which in logotherapy is defined as the will to meaning. It is no longer enough to simply suffer. It is necessary to understand the cause of suffering, and this transforms pain into a stimulus for self-knowledge. Discovering the concept of projection, Alejandro begins to rethink his emotional history, rebuilding it on new foundations. In this situation, the influence of the unconscious becomes evident, manifesting in the projection of the need for approval onto Sophia. Alejandro, elevating her, created an idealized image, worshipping not only her personality, but also the symbol she represented. A key moment in therapy is separating reality from archetypal fantasies. Alejandro's practice of keeping records becomes an instrument of self-analysis, a method of active reflection, as Jung said. This is not just an outlet for emotions, but a way to establish a dialogue with the unconscious. In the process of writing, Alejandro begins to recognize patterns, hidden emotions, and denied aspects of his personality. Pain transforms from chaos into valuable information. Memories of childhood become a moment of truth, revealing that the relationship with Sophia was not the root cause of the pain, but merely a trigger for an old wound, a wound inflicted by paternal neglect, conditioned love, and an unmet need for recognition. In depth psychology, this phenomenon is known as the reactivation of complexes, one of the most important aspects of the healing process. The meeting with a Jungian therapist marks the appearance of a new archetype in Alejandro's life, the figure of the wise mentor. Like the sage from myths who guides the hero on his journey, the therapist accompanies Alejandro in his immersion into the unconscious, not offering ready-made answers, but supporting him in his own search. The path of individuation gradually unfolds before Alejandro, allowing him to see the difference between his ego and his true self. The ego strives for the return of Sophia, while the inner self yearns for liberation from the chains of dependence. This internal discord becomes an integral part of his personal growth. Within the framework of therapy, there is a collision with the ego which creates space for the manifestation of the soul. Remembering Jung's words, "What you resist persists, what you accept transforms," becomes a turning point for Alejandro. He stops fighting the pain and begins the process of accepting it. This radical shift in the therapeutic process marks a transition from resistance to accompaniment of pain, where suffering is transformed into wisdom. Turning to family history becomes an important step in his journey. From the perspective of systemic psychology, the dynamics in a couple often reflect patterns inherited from the family. Alejandro realizes that in childhood he sought to earn love through effort, and this understanding allows him to rethink his approach to love. He begins to see his history not as a curse, but as a source of potential. In his relationship with Sophia, Alejandro formed a symbiotic bond where his existence was inextricably linked to her. In psychology, this phenomenon is known as emotional fusion. The process of separation aims to break this fusion, not to achieve indifference, but to restore emotional independence and autonomy. Changes are brewing in Alejandro's soul, marking the beginning of a new phase. The last letter, consigned to the flames, becomes for him not just an act of farewell, but a profoundly healing ritual. In Jungian psychology, such symbolic actions open the path to the unconscious for the completion of life cycles. Simple understanding is not enough. It is necessary to feel and experience the situation. The letter becomes an emotional farewell to the past, and fire, as a powerful archetype of transformation, symbolizes the death of the old and the birth of the new. The value of Alejandro's transformation lies in the fact that it leads not to oblivion, but to acceptance and integration of past experiences. He does not try to erase Sophia from his life, but transforms her into a symbol of personal growth. This is what Carl Jung taught, not to run away from one's wounds, but to learn from them, to be grateful for the experience and let go with love. In the final scene, when Alejandro, sitting in the park, realizes it wasn't about her, it was about me, the birth of his true self-awareness occurs. He stops projecting his problems onto others, gains the ability to see his true self, and, based on this, build a new life. Alejandro's transformation implies expanding the boundaries of his self-perception. He no longer identifies himself with his relationships. His personality is determined by the internal process of self-knowledge. This is true emotional maturity, the realization that a person is not reduced to their connections with other people, but represents something more. A person is how they manage their life experience. Alejandro's decision to return to writing, running, and engaging with the world is not just acquiring new habits, it is an act of affirming life. He regains his life energy, choosing life instead of a painful attachment to the past. In existential psychology, this phenomenon is defined as the will to self-restoration. When a grateful smile blooms on Alejandro's face, he is filled with a feeling of high frequency, true appreciation. He has undergone a transformation. From a state of victimhood, he has risen to the role of a student, casting aside disdain and striving for personal growth. And this is not just an intellectual exercise, but a deep emotional and energetic transformation. His inner world has undergone a radical restructuring, and, most importantly, his past history, despite all its pain, has ceased to be an unbearable burden. Now it is his compass, a reliable guide. Alejandro no longer runs from his past. On the contrary, he uses it as a bright beacon, illuminating the path to creating a more conscious and fulfilling future. And now, when the reader has reached this point, it is worth taking a deep breath. Breathe deeply, because you have not just finished watching the video material, but have become a participant in a deep, intimate, and truly human process. You are no longer the person who started this journey. Something inside you has shifted, and this is not accidental. In this joint journey through the thorns of pain, the shadows of doubt, the teachings of Jung, and the story of Alejandro, it is discovered that emotional detachment is not a final break, but rather an initiation, a kind of bridge leading to the true self. And now the question arises, which everyone must answer for themselves: is there enough courage to stop waiting for salvation from the outside and start saving yourself? And it is not about turning into a detached and indifferent person. It is about deeper self-analysis. Is a person capable of providing themselves with what they are constantly looking for in others? Love, empathy, recognition, and protection. Are they ready to become a self-sufficient source of all this? It is important to remember Jung's words that turning to the external world creates dreams, and looking within oneself leads to awakening. For too long, a person may have indulged in dreams of ideal love that will complement them, of someone who will fill the inner void, of a story that will return lost feelings. But the time has come to awaken. If looking within oneself causes pain, one should ask oneself, what fear is a person avoiding by continuing to cling to someone who is no longer there? Often, attachment is not true love, but rather an unconscious desire to hide from an unhealed wound. Perhaps it is not about a specific person, but about an experience in earlier life. Something that remains unresolved inside is waiting for the person to return to it and heal it. If today a person decides to meet with this past, then the path to true freedom will begin. Jung urged everyone to ask themselves, are they ready to know their true self, even if it requires destroying their former ideas about themselves? True freedom isn't found in the external world, but within, in accepting, transforming, and integrating your experiences. After everything you've been through, it's important to close your eyes for a few seconds and honestly ask yourself, who were you when you clung to the past, and who can you become when you finally let it go? The answers to these questions may not come immediately. Experience and wisdom may come to you over time, like fruits, ripening with you on the tree of life. However, remember, if you strive for knowledge and truth with genuine interest and an open heart, you can drastically change your destiny. After all, there's no stronger impetus for growth than a question asked of yourself at the right moment and with the right wording. In this regard, it's worth asking yourself perhaps the most important question: what will happen if you decide to stop searching for answers in the external world and turn your gaze inward toward the awareness of your own essence? The authors hope this material serves not as a final point, but rather as a launching pad, a seed, a call to action, because your presence here is no accident. Your soul craves change and growth, knocks on the door, and you boldly open it. If what you've experienced has touched your soul even a little and awakened your inner voice, the authors urge you to leave a kind of trace. You're invited to write the phrase, "I am my refuge, and my soul is no longer dependent on anyone," in the comments. Let this be a promise to yourself, a testament to your readiness for change, and an anchor to help you hold on in moments of life's storms. Before finishing watching this video, it's important to imprint in your mind one undeniable truth. You are not a broken vessel, lost in the abyss of despair, and you are not wandering alone on life's path. You are in a continuous process of metamorphosis, in a deep transformation, returning to your true essence. And this dear friends, is the most sacred mystery that can exist. We express our sincere gratitude for the opportunity to accompany you on this difficult but fascinating path of self-discovery. Thank you for your ability to feel, for your courage to open yourself to new experiences, and for your willingness to change. This episode was devoted to psychological reflections, and if we manage to touch the strings of your soul, we consider our mission accomplished. Until we meet again in the following videos, but first of all, we wish you a meeting with yourself, with that inner world that holds the answers to all questions.